All right. Wasn't that a tour de force this morning from Denise? Yes. Is Denise here? No. Good. I can say nice things about her. Well, everything I say about her is very nice, but man, what a warrior. And I kid you not, she literally has done that on a pension. Her BFCSA raises $10,000 a year to fund the work she does. But because she knows her stuff, because she's so passionate, because she doesn't back down, what she's achieved is she has the banks on the run to the extent that when she calls up, they know it's in their interest to deal with her and settle that case without stuffing around, rather than let this mushroom into something much bigger. Now, she wants it to mushroom into something much bigger, but in the meantime, she's happy to settle for that, right? But only someone of her passion and conviction and commitment to justice could have achieved that, and she really does. You know, people like Denise Brayley, Dr. Wilson Sy. If this Royal Commission hadn't been rigged, and that's not to cast aspersions on the people running the Royal Commission, but if the Royal Commission hadn't been rigged, they would be the stars of the Royal Commission, right? Because of what they can say from the inside. So what that tells you is there's a limit to the legal side of taking on the banks, right? You can do so much. Sometimes you might get an extraordinary breakthrough, but there's a limit to that. The ultimate fight is political, and that's what we want to talk about today, what we have to do to make the political changes that we can fix the system. Now, everyone on the panel is going to go through a different part of our 5-point program. I have the hardest job because I have Glass-Steagall, and I'm looking out at a sea of experts on Glass-Steagall, I feel. If there's one subject you should know in your sleep, I imagine it's Glass-Steagall. So I'm not going to, hopefully I'm not going to recap a lot of old ground for you. The subject of my presentation is you, right? Because it's the political fight about Glass-Steagall in which you people are the stars. And I had this experience earlier this year where I sat down with this MP's staffer and she said, this is a direct quote, she said, "What you are doing is working," because the only reason she met with us is because the number of calls and contacts the office had received from constituents, right? And they're very busy, members of parliament, right? They're swept up. A lot of them are very decent people, but they're so distracted by everything from the latest media circus to, when I send an email to Parliament to ask for a meeting, I'm one of 5,000 emails I get that day, right? So you got to appreciate the parameters here. They're deliberately kept busy, run off their feet. So they have very little time to pay attention to much in detail. And so when they get 1 call, 10 calls, 50 calls, then they start paying attention. And when we get their attention, I'm scratching to think who disagree with us, actually. That's like, you get their attention for a meeting and it's like, yeah, well, what's to argue here, right? And that's what you people have helped us achieve this year. So let's talk about where we're going to go now, though, because you all know Glass-Steagall. We'll talk about that a little bit, but I've only got 20 minutes. We want to keep these presentations short and sweet. Let's talk about where we're going to go. Before we begin, I want to mention the dimensions of the fight that we're in, the Glass-Steagall fight. It has multiple dimensions. The first dimension, Denise described in Technicolor this morning. That's the consumer protection part of it, right? We need a banking system where the public are protected because, as this British banker said in 2013 in the most memorable line in the debates they had about Glass-Steagall, he said, "Investment bankers are extremely adept at finding a way between the wallpaper and the wall," right? You do not trust them one bit. You've got to keep them locked out of the system. If you want a system that works for the people so people do not get ripped off, right, you've got to have a separated banking system. So consumer protection is one part of it, and in one sense, not to downplay it, but it's the lowest level. A functional economy is another part of it. Right? Because when you have a banking system, and everyone knows how important the banking system is, but when you have a banking system that since deregulation has leached all of the credit into speculation, it's not available for the real economy, right? And then you get compounding problems. So we now have a situation in Australia where idiot politicians and bankers are proud of the fact that the biggest sector of our economy is financial services. That's a parasite. If the biggest sector of your economy is financial services, you are being fleeced by you're having your lifeblood sucked out of you by a parasite. That's the situation in Australia. As a percentage of our economy, Australia's financial system is bigger than the City of London. That is extraordinary. So in the Paul Keating biography, there's a line where in the 1980s he's visiting Bob Johnson at the Reserve Bank and he looks out over Martin Place and says, I want this to be the Wall Street of the South. Well, mission accomplished, Paul, right? And look where it's got us. And so that's a big part. We do not have a functional economy under our current banking system. We have to change that. The third dimension, and this is the biggest one of all, which encapsulates the other two. The third dimension is economic sovereignty. Right? This is not just a fight against some rogue bankers at the top of CBA. The banking apparatus against which we are pitted I'll give it two headquarters. One's a minor one and one's a major one. The one that we're starting to introduce people to is the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland. Right? Now what the Bank for International Settlements is the central bank of central banks. And what most people in government don't realise is this central bank of central banks is the way the banks look like they're globally coordinating regulation, or the global central banks are coordinating regulation, when in fact it's the way the banking system gets to regulate themselves. And a member of Parliament hears that APRA has implemented a directive from the Bank for International Settlements. They don't even question it because they think, this is important global coordination for banking regulation. And all it is the latest way to make sure that this system of looting the public to prop up the banks is allowed to carry on efficiently. But the big issue there is, and it's in I haven't got an illustration with me, but it's in the latest alert service this week, and it's also in our excellent pamphlet on End the BIS Bank of England Dictatorship. The big issue is understanding that this is not a new system. It doesn't go back just to 1930 with the Bank for International Settlements. This is a very ancient system. It goes back centuries, but the big headquarters of it is the Bank of England in the City of London, right? And it's the Bank of England who set up the Bank for International Settlements. It's the Bank of England that represents this ancient British and before that Venetian way of having a monetary system where an elite, using the power of money, could loot their populations and whole nations, right, to keep their power entrenched. This is the monetary system that is the City of London is the headquarters of today, and there's no secret, it's no surprise there or no coincidence that the Bank for International Settlements is dominated by the Bank of England, or was set up by the Bank of England, and all these later things I'll go through now to do with bail-in, etc. The Bank of England directed it every step of the way. Right? So that's the third dimension, economic sovereignty. This is much bigger than just consumer protection. If we win this battle against this system, then there's so many dominoes that can fall on the back of that, not just for Australia, but at the world. And Jeff was emphasising that this morning. Okay, with that said, how much time do I have left?
15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay, good. All right. So you guys know what bail-in is and Glass-Steagall. So what I want to do is before I get to Glass-Steagall, I want to discuss with you bail-in, because this is what's going to shape next year. I'm off to Canberra on Monday, and I'll be having talks about amending the APRA law from February, right, to exclude deposits. But there's aspects of this I just want to make sure you are all aware of, so you see it as clearly as we do. So when I go to talk to members of Parliament, they're going to say, what are you talking about deposits? All the authorities say no deposits. What are you talking about, right? This law, the Treasury said no deposits, the Senate inquiry said no deposits, the RBA said no deposits, APRA says no deposits. What are you talking about? And of course, they've got a lot more credibility than the CEC in the minds of these members of Parliament. So just look at the following evidence that I'm going to present, and that's what we'll be presenting to them, and it's why we need an amendment, and I'll talk about the strategic implications in a minute. All right, So, the Financial Stability Board is this thing set up by the G20, or it was older than that, but the G20 in 2009, after the crash, gave the responsibility to the Financial Stability Board to come up with a resolution regime so you didn't have a global meltdown when a bank failed. And if you know the story, what happened was there was this lockup in the middle of September 2008 at the Federal Reserve building in New York over the weekend. Can we save this bank, Lehman Brothers? And they couldn't do it, and Lehman's went under. But the Lehman's bankruptcy was a $25 billion bankruptcy, but it triggered $150 billion in derivatives obligations, which then smashed AIG, which was going to smash the whole world. That's what happened that weekend. And 2 derivatives traders from Credit Suisse were there, right? And they walked out of there thinking, man, if we could have kept Lehman going so it didn't trigger those obligations, then we wouldn't be in this crisis. But the only way you could have done that is make its own creditors wear the losses themselves. And that was the germ of the idea for bail-in, right? So in 2011, after the G20 gave the Financial Stability Board this responsibility, they came up with their key attributes of effective resolution regimes. And the reason I got it up there is because 3.5 of those key attributes is bail-in within resolution, and it says there, write down in a manner that respects the hierarchy of claims and liquidation, blah, blah, blah. And in italics, unsecured and uninsured creditor claims. And unsecured creditors include depositors. So the Financial Stability Board's key attributes, in its own words, includes depositors in a bail-in. Unsecured creditors, that's in the Financial Stability Board's key attributes, right? You got that? Next one. Sorry. Okay. The US has this thing under the Dodd-Frank Act called the Orderly Liquidation Authority. And this Dodd-Frank Act was passed in 2010, so it actually predated the FSB's key attributes. But in that Orderly Liquidation Authority, just above Jeremy's head then, the third paragraph, Title 2 requires that the losses of any financial company placed into receivership will not be borne by taxpayers, but by common and preferred stockholders, debt holders, and other unsecured creditors. So America, under Dodd-Frank, has depositor bail-in. So the FSB says depositor bail-in, America has depositor bail-in. The European Union's Bank Recovery and Resolution Directive 2016, which the UK was so keen on, they adopted it a year earlier. Bail-in, this bail-in mechanism, and in the yellow highlight, then creditors would be asked to contribute, with those with non-guaranteed deposits over €100,000 stepping in last. Deposits will be bailed in under the European Union's Recovery Resolution Directive, right? So FSB, America, European Union. Reserve Bank of New Zealand's Open Bank Resolution, which they developed early. And they got lovely pictures there. Those illustrations, that's an illustration of bail-in for you. They want you to understand it so well. Look at unsecured, there's a lot of dimensions to this graphic. So you see unsecured creditors in the first one. They take the funds, and look at the third one, bank fails. The unsecured creditors also lose a percentage of their funds. See the difference between the pink bar in the third one and the pink bar in the second one? And then look how nicely, they're very nice in explaining this in New Zealand. Under this subhead here, unsecured creditors. Unsecured creditors include a wide range of individuals and entities. At one end of the spectrum, there are large international financial institutions that invest in debt issued by the bank, blah, blah, blah. At the other end of the spectrum are customers with cheque and savings accounts and term deposits. So that's what I love about New Zealand. They're totally transparent. Listen, mate, everything's up for grabs. And then I had to, ordinarily when I do a graphic like this, I'd cut off the text, but this text is classic. While there are differences between different classes of unsecured creditors, they all have the same legal claim on the bank. Now listen to this next line and imagine you're a 5-year-old who's just through your school opened up an account with your bank, right? With your local bank. Each has freely invested in a private institution and has enjoyed a return on that investment while accepting the risks associated with the investment. No way they haven't, When you opened a bank account, do you think you're an investor in that bank, right? And were you weighing up the risks? What was the risk? What was your understanding of the risk when you opened up a bank account? Where did the risk lie? In the bank or with you? With the dollar mine. You open a bank account because not having your money in the bank is risky, right? You trust that bank. That's what the system was based on, trust and confidence, right? From the beginning. And suddenly, some consultants and accountants and central bankers can come up with these definitions to say, oh, no, you're just investors, you're unsecured creditors, you eat your losses, right? So that's the New Zealand system. Anyway, my point is, Financial Stability Board, America, European Union, New Zealand, all bail-in deposits. But suddenly, you have the financial sector legislation amendment, crisis resolution powers and other measures. It has this language: conversion and write-off provisions means the provisions of the prudential standards that relate to the conversion or writing off of additional Tier 1 and Tier 2 capital or any other instrument. Very broad language, right? The Senate Economics Committee, when they did an inquiry into this, said, if you look at the yellow text, they did a whole thing on the Financial Stability Board. This is in their inquiry on this bill, that we provoked this inquiry. This is their report on this bill. In October, they reference the Financial Stability Board. They reference the different aspects of the key attributes, including resolution powers. Remember what 3.5 of those resolution powers was? Then they say here, the legislation proposed in the bill draws on these criteria, informing its plan for financial crisis resolution and resolution planning. In other words, this bill is based on the key attributes of the Financial Stability Board, right? But the one jurisdiction in the world, doesn't involve deposits. And what's more, it's not even a bail-in law. Don't call it bail-in, and it certainly doesn't involve deposits. Every other jurisdiction, it's bail-in and involves deposits, but not Australia, right? And we're supposed to accept that. So Jane Hume, the chair of the committee, who's a real piece of work, while I appreciate the concerns raised by the CEC, I can assure you that this bill does not constitute what some are referring to as bail-in legislation. Treasury, RBA and APRA all confirmed in their answers that the bill is definitely not bail-in legislation. So this is Treasury's section below it. It's supplementary submission. They say protection of depositors. They've got all this language here. You know, they do the normal stuff that you've all received in replies back from members of parliament. Your deposits are guaranteed up to $250,000, yada, yada, yada. And then right at the bottom, it does not include a statutory power for APRA to write down or convert the interests of other creditors in resolution, including deposits of a failing ADI, a so-called bail-in power. So Treasury says, no, it's not bail-in and it's not deposits here. But then a new senator came to work and she got a letter, one of probably the 1,000th letter that Garth Gilbert wrote, and she didn't get the memo. Someone in her office, and we've discussed this in our office, I've compared it to this, there's a really good movie you should watch called In the Name of the Father. Anyway, it's a Daniel Day-Lewis movie. It's about the Guildford Four in the bombing in London in the 1970s, and these 4 young people go to jail for 15 years. And there's this lawyer, and she's trying to fight their appeals, and she has to keep going to the police archives to get access to the file. And one day it's raining, and she gets there, and she's got a sniffle, and she's sick. And she gets the file, and she's going through it. But the next day she goes back, and the archive officer, who's normally there, he's sick because she gave him the cold the day before. And she asked for the file like she has a million times, and this new guy goes out the back and says, "Which one?" And she didn't know there was more than one before this. The other one? And this file comes out and it says, there's a big note on the top, not to be shown to the defence. And therein lay the whole evidence that these 4 young people were totally innocent, and there was a whole big frame up by MI5 and the British police. So this is our not to be shown to the defence moment, right? Because this, and a normal member of parliament, having met many of them, I'd be a bit careful about going public with this kind of information, but she is a high-powered lawyer, barrister, this woman. So she replied to Garth with this description of the legislation, which is the only honest appraisal of bail-in from any major party politician in 6 years, right? The legislation facilitates bail-in as a type of resolution power which is available for dealing with financial institution distress. This was done after the G20 leaders endorsed a new Financial Stability Board standard for total loss absorbing capacity. Specifically, it builds on the key attributes which specifies that Financial Stability Board jurisdictions should have in place legally enforceable mechanisms to implement a bail-in. This is the best part of the read. The purpose of the total loss absorbing capacity standard ensures there are mechanisms in place to stop the domino effect and reduce loss on bank shareholders, creditors and the government. Right? See, the only question left from that paragraph is bail-in of what? She doesn't confirm its deposits, but she describes everything that we've always said about this law. It's FSB, it's the key attributes, and therefore we can say it has to be bail-in of deposits. So what we've got is the government's total assurance it isn't. Now, why has the government done that? Why has our government, of all the governments in the world, gone out of its way to assure the Australian people it doesn't apply the deposits? Because of us. Right? There's only 2 countries in the world where the public have had a chance to make an issue of bail-in. Australia, thanks to us, and India this year, where the public backlash was so great, the Indian government withdrew the bill. Right? Everywhere else where these bail-in measures have been legislated, it's been done secretly. They got away with doing it secretly here, but it's blown up in their face. So we fought it to the hilt. We got a lot of support for fighting it and a lot more support for Glass-Steagall afterwards. But some of you would be familiar with Martin North and John Adams. They took it up separately, right, and came up with all kinds of different aspects about it, which are very relevant. From the middle of the year, Martin North, who was a real banking expert, he's quoted in the media all the time, he was saying, look, the only way they can clarify this is with an amendment. And remember the story, One Nation tried to put up an amendment back in February and they did the dirty on them. So now with this admission by Senator Stoker, we have proof that the government can't get their story straight on this. Right? The government's line is not the line. It's just the political line. She's done a much more thorough, honest analysis. So now's the time, for 2 purposes, now's the time to get to call for an amendment again, which we called for the other day, right? And that's what I'll be discussing next week. The 2 purposes are, if we can amend the law to exclude deposits, that's great. That's a victory. But you got to sort of think in advance, what if we can't? The fight, if anything, to do it is more important than the outcome. Because the fight will force them to expose themselves. The government and the Labor Party will have to come up with a reason why we cannot insert in this bill entirely reasonable language. This is our proposal, right? This will not change materially anything else in the bill except the question of deposits. So where it says any other instrument, we would add, provided that a prudential standard or any other provision of this Act shall not include a power to write off or convert deposits, and then insert a definition of deposits so they can't do the dirty on us there, right? And as you see, the definition's quite long because it includes every possible type of deposit. So that's the proposal. And all that does is puts in the legislation what the government assures verbally. Therefore, what would be their reason for opposing it, right? But they will. And that we can't predict how it'll play out. But what you're doing here is you're starting to rip the mask off the Bank of England BIS apparatus in Australia, which is what's directing this APRA system. Right? That's what APRA is. When you're dealing with APRA, you're not dealing with Wayne Byers. Wayne Byers is BIS and BIS is Bank of England. That's what you're dealing with. Right? And you're unmasking them, and that political fight is all important. Because then what you're doing is proving the case for why we need this anyway. Whether we get the bill amended or not, this is the solution, right? So just quickly, Glass-Steagall, which we have in Parliament in the form of the Banking System Reform Separation of Banks Bill. That bill, by the way, expires from the House of Representatives at the end of next week. So Bob Catter introduced it on the 25th of June. It's there for 8 sitting weeks if nothing's done with it, and then it expires. So in my discussions in Canberra next week, I'll be talking about getting it introduced into the Senate. Because in the Senate, it can be the basis of a Senate inquiry, and all these things can be done that give it a lot more publicity, just as the Royal Commissioner is handing down his final report on the 1st of February, right? So this is very strategic.
You put everyone to work straight away at the start of the year.
That's right. So let's just look at the virtues of Glass-Steagall. 1, it worked, right? It's better to be able to point to, if you've got a policy, it's better to be able to point to it work in practice rather than some theoretical way it can work in the future, right? Glass-Steagall worked. for almost 70 years. No systemic crises in the United States while it was in force. 2, it is undeniably a brake on speculation. And that's so important because speculation is the cancer that's eating out the financial system. This was a brake on it. In fact, even the advent of derivatives in the mid-80s would not have happened if they hadn't first watered down Glass-Steagall before they finally repealed it, right? But when they did repeal it, the derivatives that had been allowed to grow, they just went through the stratosphere with the Glass-Steagall brake taken off them. There's no too big to fail, right? And that's, look, the only logic, if you understand the concept of self-regulation, which is a garbage concept, but the part where you do want self-regulation, if there's a narrow aspect in which self-regulation can work, the bankers have to know that if they break the law, they go to jail, and if they go broke, it's their own problem. That's the only thing that will make them be cautious when they make their decisions. You take those things away, which we have, right? They're untouchable, and you see the results from the very biggest derivatives gambling to what Denise went through earlier. It protects the real economy from speculation, especially depositors and normal banking, right? And that speculation includes securitization, which is the subject du jour at the moment. One thing about we've got to understand about what Denise went through, all this fraud, and you think, okay, at the end of the day, it's got to catch up with them. They're making loans to people who can't afford it. Derivatives make bad loans profitable, right? It's such a distortion of of anything to do with common sense and sensible finance. Derivatives are evil. They can take a bad loan that no bank should ever give in a million years, and it's profitable for the bank to do that. Get that out of the system, they can't do it. No securitization, no derivatives. And finally, what the Royal Commission's highlighted on the other aspects of this, it takes out the conflicts of interest in the system. And anytime you see conflicts of interest, you've got to blow the whistle on it. You've never seen such a conflict-ridden system as the banking system has been allowed to become under vertical integration and these supposed innovations that we've had in Australia, right? Gets rid of all that, and you have a proper financial system again. So that this is a fight we can win. The Royal Commission has made our arguments for us. Denise has all the evidence of how this applies on the ground. We know that a lot of you come from different economic backgrounds, farming, into business, etc. You're all part of the real economy. You can explain how it would benefit in those terms, right? If you want a functioning national economy, you need to have this. This is not the be-all and end-all. This is the first step, but this is just like this is as basic as a pool fence around a pool, right? It's as basic as not letting pedophiles work in kindergartens, right? You just don't do it. You don't, if you see a river in the Northern Territory full of crocodiles, you don't go swimming in there. You mix victims with predators, you're going to get a mess. Why is that common sense everywhere except in the banking system, right? So this is a fight. These are arguments we can win hands down, but the political fight comes from the efforts that you people have made and our movement have made. And so my final message is, you watch the show. We put a huge emphasis on it. It doesn't matter how well phrased your emails are, how that phone call goes. As someone said, as Iron Bar Tucky said to Nolene years ago, we don't read letters, we count them, right? We in the CEC generate activity where it's your activity, or you could leave it up to the office and then we work 14 hours a day, etc. But that's nowhere near the extra effort that just all our supporters making one call that week represents, because there's thousands of you around Australia, right? And that starts getting the attention of the members of Parliament, and then we can have meetings, etc. And we've built all our success this year on the back of that. So when we put out the call to do something, don't put it off. Do it, right? And if you've started off making emails, just sending emails because you're more comfortable doing that, challenge yourself to make a call. The best call to make is send an email and then call the MP's office just to check they've got the email. Start there, right? And then they might ask you what it's about, and you just, to help identify it. You say it's about this, and you never know. what you'll probably discover is words coming out of your mouth you didn't know you're capable of forming, but you know this subject so well, and the person you're talking to on the end of the phone would know nothing, right? And you'd be aware of that, and then you get into the mode of doing that, and it's just very, very effective. Stay engaged with your local Member of Parliament and incorporate everybody else that you know, including with the CEC, to do the same thing, right? That's how we're going to win this, and if we win it here, then this is going to have global implications. All right, that's from me.